Hello there and welcome to this Entity Framework tutorial now. I'm Patrick and you have asked for the second part of this full course. Actually, this full course, I thought it would be done with the first part, but you have asked for the Entity Framework part of this course. So if you have created your Blazor application and using the models or the mock data, let's say, from the controller, with this video now, you will learn how to create your entities or add your entities, use them, read them, and so on in a SQL Server database. SQL Server Express is what we're using, and do anything with them. Well, in essence, all the CRUD operations again with Entity Framework, code first migrations. And that's everything I have to say. If you like this video and learned something, I would really appreciate it if you click the like button and maybe subscribe to my channel. It does make a difference. If you want more information about new courses, new tutorial series, new videos, then maybe you want to subscribe to my newsletter, especially for the upcoming e-commerce course and coffee. I really love coffee. Thank you so much to all my supporters. Buying me some coffee really means a lot to me, and that's how I can do all these videos. And actually, I do not have much to say. Again, some errors happened, of course. I was prepared a little bit, but not that much. And well, I hope you learned something. Have fun. All right, maybe before we start, first a short recap. Here is the application already. Let me refresh this again. And we got our superheroes page here. And as you can see, we've got two superheroes, Spider-Man and Batman. We can click on the show button here to get a little bit more information. Well, actually, it's not more information, but we get to a single page to another page where we just see the superhero. We can create a new superhero here. Let's do that really quick. For instance, with Tony Stark, who is Iron Man, of course, and the correct comic is Marvel. We hit submit, and now he is here in the list, and we can also edit a hero like Spider-Man, for instance, and we can call him the Amazing Spider-Man. Submit. And now we can change it, or we see the change, and we can delete a hero again. And that's pretty much it. We reload, and these are all the CRUD operations, as you have learned in the first part of this course or this tutorial series. And when we have a look at the code, we see here that this is not stored in a database. We have our heroes and the comics as well in our controller. So this is not stored anywhere. When we refresh the application or restart it, then we lose all our changes. So let's change that now. And the very first thing we need when we want to use SQL Server, of course, we have to get SQL Server first and install it. And the easiest way to get it is simply by Googling for it. And then this looks maybe like that. I just entered SQL Server, and then you see SQL Server downloads, for instance. And then let's see, that's the correct one, Express. Hit download now, and then the download already starts. I have installed it already, so I don't need that. But apart from that, what I recommend downloading is a bit further down. Download the SQL Server Management Studio, because with that thing, it's easier to manage your database. You can see the tables and the fields. You can make changes to the databases and add some entries, of course, but we will do that together in this little tutorial here. So we've got the SQL Server and SQL Server Management Studio. I don't install it now together with you because I already have installed it. So if you haven't downloaded and installed SQL Server and SQL Server Management Studio, just a short note on that. You can also use Visual Studio to watch your database, but again, I like SQL Server Management Studio. Long story short, just download it or pause the video, download it, install the stuff, and then get back to me, please. I'm waiting, so take your time. Everything's fine. I just take a sip of my coffee here and then we can continue with this. All right, let's get back to Visual Studio now, because the next thing we have to do is install Entity Framework. For that, if the application is running, we stop it. And then you can check if Entity Framework is already installed. And to do that, you simply enter .NET EF. And as you can see here, in my case, I've got the Entity Framework Core .NET Command Line Tools 5.0.5 installed. Just for your information, I was on a vacation and now we've got another version. So what I can do here now, I can uninstall this thing and then install the latest command line tools, of course. To uninstall this, I just enter .NET tool uninstall -- global and then .NET -EF. Already uninstalled. And now to install this stuff again, I simply enter .NET tool install -- global and then again .NET -EF, hit return, and then tool.NET EF version, you see it now, 5.0.9 was successfully installed. And let's double check that with .NET EF, and now here's the latest version. Great. There are some packages we also have to install, but maybe we can do this along the way. So let's continue now with the connection string. You need the connection string, of course, to connect to the database, and you add it usually in the app settings JSON file. And up here we add, it's great that this is suggested now in this version of Visual Studio. We add this section here, connection strings, and in here now we can enter any name we want, for instance the default connection. And now this is the tricky part, might be different in your case, but if you install SQL Server Express locally just to learn all this, then your connection string might look like this. First you enter the server, and this is then the local host, and then \\, and then SQL Express, and then the database, which is the name of the database. In our case, we can maybe call this superhero DB, and after that, we add the trusted connection and set it to true. And that's it. That's it already. The only thing that's, well, it's a convention. You can change this section, the name of this section. You don't have to call it connection strings, but you will see in a minute that, well, this makes things a bit handier, more easy, I would say, easier, English, right? Because it's then easier to access this section in another file where we have to add some configurations, and then I get to this thing. You will see what I mean in a couple of minutes. So this is the connection string already. We've got the connection string covered, and now the next thing is the data context, and this is where, well, it's not where all the magic happens, but it's also very important for your actual database, because with the data context, you access the database and the tables, and with the tables, you will enter all the entities, such as the comics and the superheroes down here. So let's add the data context. For that, in the server project, I add a new folder and call this one data. And then in here we add a new class, and we call this thing now data context. And this one inherits from DB context. And as you can see, Visual Studio has no idea what I want to do here, but with control and then period, you should see this suggestion here, install package Microsoft Entity Framework Core, and that's what I meant. We can do this along the way. Well, at least some of the packages we can install along the way. We will see again this in a minute, that it doesn't work for every package. And we just select find and install latest version of Microsoft Entity Framework core, hit apply, and that should be it. Now you see a DB-Context instance represents a session with the database and can be used to query and save instances of your entities. That's everything we need to know for now, and that's exactly what we want to do. But we're not done here. We first need also a constructor. So let's enter CTOR and then hit tab twice, and now we've got our constructor, but we also have to enter an argument, and this is DB-Context options with our data context here. Let's call this also options, and we have to call the base constructor with the same argument. And with that, now we can already add some properties, and these properties will represent the tables when we add migrations. So the first one is of type dbSet, database set, and then the type we want to see in the database. We have to add the using directive for superhero db shared, and then the name. This is important because this is the name of the actual table then, and it is recommended or convention to just pluralize your class name. In our case, it's the class name is superhero, and then the name of the table would be superheroes. Simple as that. And we also need another one for the comics. So the type is comic, and we call this one comics. So far the data context, and now the last thing we have to do before we can run our first migration, because we're using code first migrations here, is we have to register this data context, and this magic happens in the startup CS. And bear with me, I see that some errors might happen because I have no idea what this temp file is. This time I was a little bit prepared. I tested this a little before recording, but well, let's see. Maybe there are some artifacts left, some files on the hard disk. I don't know, because of course I called them the same. I gave them the same names as we are doing now. So well, we'll see. Registering the data contexts. To do that, again in the startup CS, we go to the configure services method, and then add services, add DB context. This is already suggested. We add our data context. Don't know where this is, so we add the using directive for our data folder. And then this needs a little configuration here. And for these options you can enter here, we want to tell our application that we're using SQL Server. So use SQL Server, and as you can see, we don't know how to get this, but let's continue first, because this method takes another argument, and this is now the connection string we have entered in the app settings JSON file. And to get it, we enter our configuration, and then we can use now the method get connection string, and that's why we called this section connection strings. Otherwise we would just use get section and then have to type some more characters. But you know, we software developers are lazy, and that's why I love this method get connection string. And then we only have to enter the name of the connection string, and we are already done here. But what about this method now? Change signature. This is not helping, so let's just install a package manually. We right click the server project and choose manage new get packages, and you see here this is from the preparation. We also need another package, but first the SQL Server package, and that's the one, Microsoft Entity Framework Core SQL Server. And now just hit install. Okay, I accept. And now let's go back and let's see now. Using Microsoft Entity Framework Core. That's the correct one. Now this is done. And the very next thing we can do is our first migration. But a short recap again. What did we do? We entered our connection string here in the app settings JSON file. Then we added the data context here, which is a DB context, a database context. We added the constructor and already 2 entities, 2 DB sets for our tables. Okay, and then what we did is we registered this DB context, our data context here, and told it to use the SQL Server in essence with the connection string from our app settings JSON file. So this is the preparation and in essence for our code first migrations. Okay, and now let me just clear this and we add our first migration with .NET EF. Let me just show you .NET EF again. And then here, this might be interesting. You see there are not a lot of commands for the migration actually, or for Entity Framework. It's database, commands to manage the database, DB context, and also migrations. And actually we only need, for all this, what we're going to do here, we only need migrations and database. And again, the first one now would be .NET EF migrations, and then add a new migration. And let's call this one simply initial for our very first one. And I'm pretty excited now. You see, the build has been failed. And why is that? I don't see any issues here. Oh wow, but we see a big error list here. Type of namespace Entity Framework Core does not exist. Interesting, okay. What if we just rebuild the solution? Because actually this should be here. See it, Entity Framework Core SQL Server. Everything is here. I have no idea why this failed. But let's try this. .NET build. Build succeeded. Okay. Let's try that again. Build succeeded. Okay, we are one step further. But you see now, your starter project, server project, doesn't reference Microsoft Entity Framework Core design, and this package is required for the Entity Framework Core tools to work. So let's install this one and then we should be all set. So again, just enter design and now we see Microsoft Entity Framework Core design. Install this one, hit OK, I accept. And now this should work. Let's try it last time. Hopefully. Okay, maybe we have to rebuild this thing again. And again. All right, nice. Okay, this is done. You can already see that if anything went wrong with your migrations, maybe you forgot something, I don't know, then you can remove this migration with EF migrations remove. But if you have already run this migration, meaning you have updated your database, you cannot simply remove the migration. You have to first manually roll back the changes in the database. Just for your information, but now we should have some more files here and another folder, the migrations folder. And in here now, DataContext model snapshot is not interesting for us. This is just helping Entity Framework so that it knows what it has to do. And for us, the interesting file is this initial file here. and the file with the date and the time. And I hope you do not hear the ambulance in the background, because there is one driving around in the city now. Hopefully everybody is fine. I don't know. It's getting louder and louder. Let's wait a little, maybe. Okay. And it's driving away. Okay. The initial migration. Or it's stopping right in front of our house. I don't know. Anyways, in the migration file, you see two methods, the up method and the down method. And the down method is easier, of course. It simply drops the tables superheroes and comics. This means that in the up method, it will create these tables. First, you can see it creates the table comics with the fields ID and name. And ID already is a primary key here. Hope you know a little bit of data. You have a little bit knowledge of databases and how they work. So I do not have to explain what a primary key is, what a foreign key is, and so on. But anyways, with the convention that we are using a field called ID, Entity Framework knows that this is the primary key of this table. And additionally to that, we only got the field name. So yeah, in the table then we only see the ID and the name of the comics. And for the superheroes, it's pretty much the same. We see the ID field, which is a primary key, and this is then increased automatically. So we do not have to set the ID. And then we got the fields first name, last name, hero name. And now this is interesting maybe, because we got the field comic ID. And when we have a look at our actual model here, we see that we did not add this field comic ID. We only have the field comic, but we will have to change this or add the comic ID to the superhero. Jesus Christ. Beautiful sound. I don't know if this is an ambulance or if these are some firemen. Still, I hope everything is fine. It's pretty hot here now. So maybe there's a fire. I don't know. Okay, I hope that's it now. Anyways, we need the comic ID here as well. You know what, maybe just add it. Let's add it now. So, and comic ID, and then we are good. And we also have to remove this one. You will see why again in a couple of minutes, but let's stick to our migration now. So back to the migration file. When we change this model here, by the way, with the comic ID, there might be a change in the database as well, but let's do this one step after another. So we got our initial migration, we got the fields, and here also you see the foreign key, which is the comic ID. Okay, so far so good. And I would say we try to run this migration now. Let's see what happens. Let's clear this again, and now we run this with .NET EF database update. Build succeeded, and we are getting an error. There is already an object. Oh yeah, of course, because of my preparations. You see it here already. We've got some databases, and there is the superhero database. Let's remove this one. Let's just delete it, and we close the existing connections. And let's also close SQL Server Management Studio when my machine wants to, but it seems Management Studio is not reacting here or responding. Now it, oh, and it restarts. Nice. There it is. Let's connect. Okay. We've got our databases. You see some databases here. For instance, also the Blazor e-commerce database. This is the one I'm using for the upcoming Blazor e-commerce course. So if you want to get access to this course, maybe you want to subscribe to my newsletter, because then you get early access and all the information you need if you want to access this course, and you will know when it's done and so on. Apart from that, we got the Blazing Shop from the YouTube series, Blazor Battles from the online course, .NET RPG from the online course. Sweet. Okay, anyways, let's try that again. .NET EF database update. It succeeded, and we're done. So let's refresh. And we see the superhero database, and we got the tables, comics, and superheroes, and we see, of course, the columns. You see that this is a primary key. We see the columns here. We got a primary key and a foreign key. Beautiful. But now there's one little problem. Well, it's not really a problem, but it can get on our nerves. The tables are empty, right? And that's why we, of course, in the last part, in the first part of the series, we added some entities, some superheroes, some comics by ourselves manually. And we can do that here as well. Of course, we can either enter them here in the SQL Server Management Studio, or we make use of the seeding functionality of Entity Framework. And I would say we do exactly that. We just seed some data here. And to do that, we go to the DataContext again. And then we already added the comic ID. And let's have a quick look here. So this is our comic class and the superhero class. All right. And now we need this because when we want to seed data, we also already have to set the IDs here. When we add new entities, when we add new superheroes, new comics, and so on, we do not have to set the ID because Entity Framework is doing this for us. But if you want to seed data, also with relationships, we have to set our IDs manually. So in essence, we're doing the same we did in our first part of this series here in the controller with just setting these entities here. But again, now in the sake of seeding the data for the database. To do that, we need another function, or we need to override another function. And this one is called onModelCreating with the model builder here as a parameter, like that. And then we can say model builder entity comic. So we want to do something with the comic entity here, and then call the function has data. And with that function, we can add some data. And again, since I'm really lazy, I can just copy this stuff from here, go back and enter our comics here. And the formatting is not working here. I have no idea why, but that should work now. And we do exactly the same for our superheroes. So this time it's the entity superhero. And here now we grab these two, go back and add them here. And now we have to pay attention here, because now we do not want to set the comic. We set the comic ID. In our case, the first one is Marvel and the second one is DC with ID 2. We remove the comma. And this should be it. And now you see why we have to add the ID here, because Marvel is ID 1 and DC is ID 2. All right. Let's try that. Just save it And again, we add another migration with .NET migrations add, and then we say seeding, for instance. The name is totally up to you. Let's call this one seeding, and let's see what happens. Okay, another wall of errors, but this is expected, actually. And it says the seed entity for entity type superhero cannot be added because it has the navigation comic set. To seed relationships, add the entity seed to superhero and specify the following key values: comic ID, consider blah blah blah. Long story short, we have to change one little thing here. We cannot set the comic here already. We cannot initialize it. And this, of course, leads to changes to our actual Blazor application. Little changes, but we'll see that. And I hope that that's it already, actually. So let's try that again. Okay, loss of data. Yeah, this might be the case, but let's have a quick look now. So here's our comics table. We just right click and say execute SQL, and we do not, oh, of course we do not see anything because we only added the migrations file, but we did not update the database. But what you can see here now, first thing, drop foreign key. Okay. Thing is, that's because I added the comic ID to the superhero model, but I did this after we added the first migration. When I would have done this before, you wouldn't see that change, but now Entity Framework, I don't know why, because the comic ID was already there, but Entity Framework says that, well, we have to make a change here. So the foreign key is dropped, then the column is altered, and I think in the end, yeah, this here is what I expected. The foreign key is added again, but apart from that, we insert some data, as you can see here for the comics and also for the superheroes. And I think that here is a change in on delete, because in the initial case there was restrict, don't perform the action if it would result in a constraint violation, and instead generate an error. All right, and now here, cascade the action to the constraint rows. So this would mean, I think, that when we remove the comic, that the superheroes would also be removed. I don't know. Try this on your own if you like, and tell me in the comments if this would be the case. What happens if we remove the comic? Are the heroes then still there? Would be interesting to know. So if you tried it, please tell me in the comments section. But this should not be part of this tutorial series. We update the database now, I would say. So back to the package manager console, and we enter .NET EF database update again. And in a couple of seconds, this is done, and we now refresh the table and we see Marvel and Detective Comics here with the IDs 1 and 2. And for our superheroes, we see Spider-Man and Batman. Beautiful. This works. And this is actually just all the preparations you have to do before you can actually work with the data, right? So now the next step is to actually implement the CRUD operations. And regarding the comics, it's just reading the comics. So let's go back to Visual Studio. And now in the superhero controller, we change this method, and we need a constructor here. And I want to emphasize here, I do not remember if I did this in the first part, but I want to emphasize that what we're doing here is not best practice, because we have a fat controller, so-called fat controller, meaning that all the logic is implemented in this controller. It is better to use services. Like here in the client, we also have an interface and a an implementation file for our service, and you would do exactly the same or something similar, I'd say, in the server project. We will do this in the e-commerce course, by the way. And by the way, do you want to see a devlog of this e-commerce course? Because I'm currently working on it. It takes some time because I think it will be so big. It will explode every length I did before with any online course. But maybe it would be interesting for you to see the current state of the course. If so, please tell me in the comments. I would really appreciate that, and I would love to show you what I am currently doing with this thing. I think it's really exciting, and it's lots of fun. You can see here that it's getting late. It's 10 o'clock. For me, it's late. You know, got a toddler boy who's sleeping right now, and I hope he sleeps for a couple of hours more. But anyways, this should not be the topic of this video here. Where were we? The comics, right? So this is a fat controller. Don't do this in production. Please use services. You can learn how I did this in other videos and of course in my online courses. But for the sake of learning, for the purpose of learning now here in this video, let's just use this fat controller to just save you time, I would say. Okay, superhero controller. We see the comics here. We also see these squiggly lines because we want to use an asynchronous function here, but there is nothing asynchronous happening. But this will change in a minute with our entity framework stuff. But first, a new constructor. And this is the superhero controller. And in this constructor, we will inject our data context now. So we're using dependency injection. Isn't that great? Okay, we call this context. Of course, we have to add the using directive. And we can add this as a field. We create and assign a field. And by the way, if you don't have this in Visual Studio, if you don't have this suggestion, you will have the suggestion to create and assign a field, but I think usually this one is simply called context without the underscore here. And what you would then have is something like this context, and then you would have to remove this term here, you would have to add the underscore here, and so on. Tedious work if you do this a couple of times. There is a way to configure Visual Studio to, automatically create a variable or a field like that. And you do this, by the way, just to show you real quick, in Tools Options, and then it's already open, Text Editor, C#, Code Style, Naming, and then down here you see it. And you can just say Manage Naming Styles, and then you click the plus button, and then you enter something like that. Underscore field name, required prefix, just the underscore, camel case name, and then you see the example here. You hit OK, and then you're done. And when you get the suggestion then to add this field, to create and assign the field, you do not have to remove anything. You just got your underscore private read-only variable. Isn't that great? Okay, so we injected the context, and then the next thing is to get the comics. We simply say await and then context. This is now our data context, and in that context now we can access the superheroes, for instance, and also the comics. And to make this asynchronous, we say to list async, and we add the using directive for entity framework core, and that's it. This is now how we get the comics from the database. And I would say we test this already. So .NET watch run. Got some warnings, and there it is. Hello world. Let's hit F12 and let's have a look at the network tab. We go to the superheroes, And superheroes is called twice. I don't know why. And we get an error here that says object reference not set an object in the added superhero razor component, line 49. All right, let's see. Added superhero 49. Yes, of course, because we changed our hero model. Now we do not initialize the comic. So what can we do here now? Maybe just set this to 1 first. Or we keep it like that, and then we say hero comic is a new comic. I think this would work for now, but I also think that we have to change this later. Back to our application, it has already been restarted. Yeah, okay, that's it. And now we see the comics. Let me have a look again. Okay, it's called twice. Well, why not? Don't want to fix that now. And to show you now that these are really the database comics, I just edit them and reload the application, and we got Marvel 1 and DC 1. Great, isn't it? We already get database stuff. So let's change that back. And let's continue with getting the heroes. So where is it? There it is. And we have to go to the controller again, of course, get superheroes. And this is quite similar. Or maybe let's just type it. Await context. And this time it's superheroes to list async. And I think that we get an error again here, but let's see. App is reloading. Yep, there's the error. And this one says now object reference and set an instance of an object again. We get another reference exception in the superheroes razor in line 28. And where's the superheroes razor file? I don't see. Oh, it's a page, right? Yeah, there it is. 28 was it, right? Yeah, is it 28? Was it 28? Line 28. Okay. Got our heroes. I don't know if this is correct. Comic name. Okay, because the actual error is really that the comic is null. And then, of course, if the comic is null, we cannot access the name, and then everything crashes. I don't know why it's line 28, but, well, I think because of the whole, because of the body of the function. Yeah, that'll be it, of course, because that's HTML, I think. But anyways, to fix this, again, we have to add something here, and usually I would teach you that a little bit later. I would say that's more advanced stuff. But to get the comics, we have a relationship here, right? And to get the comics, we have to tell Entity Framework to load them. And we do that with this little function here, include. And then we can say for our superhero, please also include the comic. That's the function. You see that's something about related entities. We save this, and now it is working. Isn't that great? Okay, so that's how we get all the superheroes, but that's the easy part. Now we're getting a single hero, which is also easier. But then we're getting to updating, creating, and so on. So for getting a single superhero, what we can do now is we do not want to access our heroes, our dummy heroes here. of course we want to access our heroes from the database. So what we do is we enter again await context superheroes, and again we include superhero comic, and then first or default async this time. Maybe put this in another line, and when we found this hero, we simply return it. That's it already. Okay, let's test that again. Saved it. Application is reloading. And let's have a look at the network tab here. We want to show Peter Parker. And here we make the call. And the same for Bruce Wayne. And maybe again to really prove that these are the database ones, we call these Spider-Man and Batman 1. We reload the page. We already see the change and also see it here when we read the single heroes. Okay, that's nice. And now comes the hard part. We want to create a new hero, and for that, because we need this get single superhero method a couple more times. No, that's not true. We need this one here. This statement here. We need this a couple more times because here you can see we're returning the heroes, all the heroes, and that's why I would suggest to extract this method and call it get db heroes maybe. And we can use this one already in the create method here. And now what we have to do is we do not need to set the ID, as I told you earlier. What we do is now we access the context and the superheroes. We add this hero here. That's already fine. But what we then have to do is we have to save the changes, because with the add function we make a change to the context, and then with await context save changes async we actually commit this change to the database, and then we return our heroes. And let's see how this works now. I think it's rebuilt. Great. It's reloading. And we make our test with Tony Stark, who is Iron Man. Submit. And we're getting another error. And this one looks complicated. Cannot insert explicit value for identity. Okay. So we have to make a change in our, where is it? In our, is it this one? Yeah, this was what I was guessing. We cannot set a new comic here. We actually, sounds stupid, but we actually have to set this to null. And the comic ID of the hero would then be set to comic ID, because otherwise, as you can see here in the headers, we see the in the headers, come on, what's going on here? In the headers, we see what we're sending to the server. You see the request payload, and here's the complete comic, and actually the ID wasn't working. That's nice. And because there's the ID 0 and we wanted to set this to 1, and now the comic ID is the comic ID we see here in the radio group, in the radio buttons. So this we have to set, and the comic should be null, because otherwise Entity Framework is trying to create the comic, but we don't want to do that. So we really just want to add this hero with the proper comic ID. And I think this is saved. Is it saved? Let's try this again. What happens now if we, I don't know, save the controller again? It's rebuilding, and here it's also reloading, and we're getting another error telling us added superhero razor line 50. Again, a null reference exception. Oh, that's exactly what we changed now. Oh, I think I did this at the wrong place. Of course, not in the onParameter set async. We have to change it here in the handle submit. Of course, we're clicking the submit button. Jesus. So here now, the hero comic. We set this one to null. So we do not actually set a complete comic object. Actually, what we would do in a real project, or what I would do, is to simply create a DTO, a data transfer object, meaning a class which would be called create superhero DTO, something like that. And then in this case, we wouldn't use a property comic. This is great if we want to read a superhero actually, because then we include the comic and we get the information of the comic and just can access it then. But if you want to create a superhero, you see it now live that this is actually making some trouble. And yeah, that's why we have to do this strange thing and set the comic to null. But then we set the comic ID to the comic ID variable up here. Okay, let's see how this works now. Told you errors will happen. And is it? Yeah, I think it has been reloaded now. Let's just double check. Save this one. It's building. It is reloading, and now this seems to work. Okay, let's try that again. Tony Stark, who's Iron Man? It's Marvel, submit, and there he is. Isn't that nice? So we see now with superhero, this is what we sent to the server. The request payload comic is null now, but we got the proper comic ID. What happens when we use DC? For instance, what's her name? Natasha Romanov, I think. Romanov. Black Widow. Oh no, she's also Marvel, of course. Works. Okay, anyways, we are implementing the update next, so let's see if this works then. Okay, so adding seems to work. Let's update the hero now with our beautiful method update superhero. Now in this case, what we have to do is we have to set the values manually. First things first, we return all our heroes again. And now here we can actually copy this thing. Context superheroes include, and first or default async. That's great. And now we do not need this stuff. And instead we now say db hero first name is hero first name, and we do this for the other properties as well. So we got the last name, the hero name, and the comic ID. So the last name, the hero name, And of course, the comic ID is the comic ID. And since we again made a change, we have to call context save changes async. Okay, that's for updating. And let's have a look. There we are. And let's say now again, instead of Spider-Man, that's now the amazing Spider-Man. Hit submit. And we already get it from the database. And let's have a quick look. We didn't check the creation I see here now. There it is. We got Tony Stark, we got Black Widow, and we got the amazing Spider-Man. This simply works. And what if we want to change the comic here? Submit. This is strange, okay, but the data is correct. We got the 2 here, and we can set this back to Marvel. Okay, you see, we would have to make some changes to the client. I don't know when we, let's have a quick look. There it is in the edit superheroes, edit superhero. When we do not set the comic, was it rebuilding? I'm not sure if Visual Studio is really getting the change, or the .NET Watcher, or what's it called. But anyways, okay, we get another null reference exception, of course. That the comic ID is now, yeah, of course, because again. That's fun. Okay, get the comic. Okay, can't do this one. Cannot do this either because we do not get the comic ID. But what we can do is, of course, set the comic ID. It's rebuilding. Nice. Get no error. Well, now this thing is not null, I think 0. What if I try to submit this? Oh, getting an error, that's okay. Trying to send 0, yeah, this wouldn't work, that's true. But anyways, when we now make an edit here, we see Marvel. And this now works too. Maybe you've seen it. If not, you have to rewind the video a little bit, because before we change that, meaning instead of using the field comic ID, we used comic.id, so the ID of the comic object. I edited the comic here, and right after submitting the modification, submitting the change, it jumped back to select Marvel, and that's because we used or we added a new comic, we initialized a new comic for the hero comic object, and then used this ID, and by default, as you can see here, 1 is the ID. But now what we do is we always use the field comic ID on parameters set to set the actual comic, and then this is correct. The only thing that does not, well, it does work in essence. You can set the comic, but when we create a new hero, we do not have a default value, because the comic ID of the hero by default is not set. And actually, maybe we can change that, but I think you can try this on your own, right? Yeah. So we created a new hero, we updated a new hero, and now there's only one thing left, and this would be deleting a hero. So let's do that. Back to Visual Studio, and then in the superhero controller, here's our delete superhero method. Again, could have extracted this method as well, actually. We get the hero, and then almost the same, we say context superheroes remove, and again that's a change, so we call context save changes async, and we then return await get db heroes. All right, save it, it's building, and we shouldn't have no warnings anymore. Great. Delete, and Black Widow is gone. Refresh, and it's done. That's it. Yeah, well, I hope you learned something, and please bear with me. Regarding the client, of course, we have to make some changes, but I think in this episode, or in this second part of this course, it wasn't really important to make these changes to the client. It was important to learn how you would use Entity Framework to make these CRUD operations in a Blazor application with the SQL Server database, using code first migrations, you know the drill. And now you know how to do all this, how to create a Blazor app, do all the CRUD operations with superheroes, and also how to use a SQL Server database with these CRUD operations, and how to use Entity Framework to realize all that. So again, I hope you learned something. If so, thank you very much for clicking the like button and subscribing to this channel. Maybe you also want to subscribe to my newsletter to get all the information about upcoming courses. I really, well, I do not spam you, I promise. I not even write emails once a month. It's really not that often. But anyways, if there are new information, then you are the first to know. And thank you again to all my supporters buying me a coffee. I really need that, and I really appreciate it. You guys are awesome. And if you already want to learn more about Blazor, then maybe you want to check out my Blazor WebAssembly Full Stack Bootcamp. Link is in the video description. There we are not using superheroes, but maybe it's even better. We're creating a classic online browser game where users can authenticate, of course. We're using JSON Web Tokens there, and then these users can create units, fighters, build their army, fight against other users, and then with these battles they can climb the leaderboard. Maybe you want to check it out. There's a preview here on YouTube. Check out the info card, and apart from that, again, the link is in the video description. Thank you so much for watching, and I see you next time. Take care.